Hello and welcome to Vertiv Live, Dial E for Energy. Hope you are well and safe. I am Gabriel Bonilla, Professional Services EMEA, and today we have two amazing guests to discuss energy and carbon efficiency, critical infrastructure and sustainability. Paul Eggleton, Director of Four Corners Global, and one of the founding members of the Energy Managers Association. If you in the audience are an energy manager, there will be very interesting topics for you. Then we also have Vijay Chauhan, Energy and Sustainability Manager for O2, Telefonica UK, part of Telefonica Group. If you, watching us, are interested in carbon management and sustainability, bear with us for a very informative conversation. Paul, Vijay, great to have you. Both of you have a lot of experience starting in manufacturing, obviously telecoms, our focus for today, including data centers, but also other types of sites, offices, call centers, retail stores, professional associations, smart everything, smart mobility, smart cities, smart grids, facilities management, and so on. And this is a very important moment for all of us in the industry, as we see top global organizations getting serious about sustainability, really seriously approaching the topic. We can see this topic, sustainability, as a three pillars framework. We think of carbon, reducing carbon as much as possible or even going negative, waste reduction, zero waste, circular economy, and also water optimization. Water is the next big thing. Paul told me in a conversation some years ago. Also, waste can be turned into energy. It all has finally become a boardroom discussion. And I would say we are at a historical peak in relation to energy, carbon, sustainability, as this is closely connected to climate change and the new normal. So I start by asking Paul.
Thanks, Gabrielle, and thank you for inviting me onto this webinar today. I think for me, the biggest change we're seeing is actually probably more of a systems change, which also kind of is reflected by the changing kind of culture and awareness of all things sustainability. I think in digital infrastructure, any kind of sort of corporate environment, retail, manufacturing, you've got technology innovation, everything's becoming more efficient, whether that's the kind of supporting infrastructure in terms of power and cooling, or the actual kind of hardware itself, which is, you know, all the manufacturers are constantly improving and being able to do kind of more with less. So I think that's kind of always been there right from the start. But for me, one of the biggest changes that's actually enabling even greater savings is the more kind of systems approach and ability to control these systems in a more flexible way. It can be offices in terms of its overall building management systems and the people that are in them, and then the building's kind of control against that. And so you're starting to see this more flexible systems approach, and also the commercial models that go with that are enabling the supply chain to become more efficient as well, and to offer kind of more innovative commercial models and solutions. So that's probably the biggest change that I'm seeing at the moment.
Excellent. Vijay, would you agree? Would you complement taking the O2 perspective to this problem and to these challenges, please?
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Gabriel. And again, thanks for the invite also. So from our side, it's important to say that most of our sites are unmanned technical sites. So we're very much equipment driven, but we have to kind of break our model down into two areas, Gabriel. One is what we call the active part of our business, which is the radio network, and the second is the passive. But the two have to work hand in hand. So from an active and a passive point of view, we've got to make sure that we're buying the equipment, the most efficient equipment as we possibly can in the first instance, so that we're not chasing efficiencies on sort of poorly spec'd equipment. But equally, it's important that we don't over-specify that equipment also, Gabrielle. Instead of sending energy managers out to do surveys, and we do those sorts of things, of course we do, but it's really important to try and get it as close as we can the first time around, and it's those operating conditions that are really important as well. Another thing to consider here is the resiliency of the radio equipment. So over the years, there's been a trend to sort of make sure that we're sort of ahead of the curve in that respect, and we need to make sure that we understand how the network equipment operates. Is it more resilient? Is it less resilient? And depending on which parts of the network you look at, some equipment is even more resilient than it ever was before. We can leave it outside, it can be open to the elements, it can effectively cool itself. But then there are other parts of the network that are a bit more sensitive to temperatures that we need to manage a bit more closely. Historically, we've been very, very nervous to up the temperatures within our data centers, but as kit has become more resilient, we've been able to increase our temperatures ever so slightly over that time, which has helped. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that the active and passive strategies do go hand in hand, and the sites do need to become more smarter in terms of their feedback. What we can't do is take a snapshot of a site in terms of cooling, for example, and say, okay, it's working fine now, let's check it again in a month's time or 2 months' time. There's so much being thrown at our sites now in terms of equipment and upgrades, they're constantly changing. So we have to bear that flexibility in mind also. So that feedback, Gabrielle, in terms of smart sites is really important. We need to know straight away if there's a hotspot developing, we need to know straight away. If there's an issue, again, we need to know straight away so that we can act on it.
Excellent. So we know our sector, high-tech industries lead the way. So if we think switch sites, cell sites, data centers, we have very advanced technologies and very efficient. But what about other sectors or even our offices, call centers and shops, our retail stores? And can we learn lessons from telecoms and from data centers and apply them indirectly to our customers, to our corporate customers, for example, of other sectors? Can they learn from us? Are these technologies evolving and reaching them at the border?
Certainly, I would say so. I think when you look at the evolution of corporate estates, especially leading organizations that even pre-COVID were really focusing on employee well-being, for example. You then look at the kind of the office environment, and actually you could compare that almost to a data center. The additional sensors that can now go into an office, it's not just temperature, but it's also CO2 levels, it can be VOC levels, the ability to deploy low-powered, cheap IoT sensors throughout an office environment can allow you to really kind of map what's kind of going on. So the ability to then marry that data with some engagement with your employees as well can really drive a kind of a strong well-being sort of directive, and that in itself has it's now been sort of measured and supported in research that can help improve productivity, reduce sickness, etc., etc. So you're almost kind of seeing offices having the same levels of data capture and feedback and control as you would find in a data center. With retail, it does come back to the kind of the costs, so that there does become a point where certain activities you can't do everywhere. It's just not commercially feasible to do that. But actually, again, it comes back to some of the ways that you can engage with your supply chains and your facilities management providers to kind of, rather than the traditional input type model, actually sort of evolve into an output type or an outcome type model that really kind of drives the right behaviours. So yes, I think we are seeing that kind of evolution in other sectors adopting some of the practices that we've kind of seen over the last 10 years.
Vijay, in terms of the business customers of O2, and we have technologies like IoT and all these hardware and software tools that we can help our customers with. How do you see that market, that energy efficiency provider side of the operator?
Yeah, I think just kind of building on what Paul said there about BMS controls, I think, yeah, absolutely essential. And those systems have evolved from the larger sites, Gabrielle, so the larger corporate, the larger technical sites. Now we're now seeing sort of smaller, sort of packaged versions of those. I think BMS systems and smart metering do go hand in hand as well. And you know, when you install those sort of almost like housekeeping type measures, you know, LED lighting, more efficient cooling, it's great, but you've got to make sure that you're managing them properly. It's no good installing these things and just leaving them on. There has to be a control system that says, okay, there's no one in the building, we need to shut those systems down, and there's got to be a way of monitoring it through smart metering. So I think it's got to be considered as an overall package of things, Gabrielle. It's not just one thing that's going to give you that efficiency. It's putting in those measures, but being able to control it and measure it at the same time. In terms of retail, you know, we have hundreds of stores, and what we find is that it's those simple measures that tend to be the most effective. You know, just simple things like, for example, aligning air conditioning set points within shopping centres to the main shopping centre. You know, just that simple thing means that your systems aren't constantly fighting the rest of the shopping centre and against other systems within the same building. But again, that comes down to monitoring and managing those systems. I think in terms of business cases and making those business cases stack up, it can be more difficult, Gabrielle, on a smaller scale. And trying to build a business case that has a quick payback on smaller sites is, of course, more difficult. And they do need to make business sense, but we can't always look at it that way. You know, the commercials might suggest a longer payback, but the carbon benefits will be there on day one. So I think we've just got to be really bold and put the investment in now so that we can make those carbon benefits, see those carbon benefits straight away.
Fantastic. So is a great start. Thanks for your initial thoughts. As we warm up the discussion, we encourage the audience also to participate, to keep participating, sending comments, questions to our guests, to all of us. So your online participation is very welcome. Going further, in terms of sustainability, as said before, it has finally reached the boardroom. So it's a very important topic now for organizations, both public and private. So please, your thoughts and your perspectives on sustainability as a very important issue for organizations, and how to keep innovating, how to find the resources to make it happen in practice.
So there's a lot to kind of cover off there. I think coming back to my first point around the evolving nature of culturally being aware of sustainability, and I think nobody is in any doubt that it's just that you've just got to be doing this. I think historically you looked to certain organisations and the leadership in those organisations, you know, the O2s, the Marks and Spencers, the Unilevers, where the senior management really got it and they really understood the kind of the business benefits to this. So I think, you know, there are still companies that are playing catch up, and there are still companies that will just do the kind of the bare minimum. But I think also the times are changing. You know, you look at some of the reporting requirements now. We've kind of evolved from corporate social responsibility to kind of ESG, environment, social and governance. And that governance piece is a huge focus area for investors as well. So, you know, the spotlight has really been shone on organisations and what they're doing, not just because of the philanthropic, it's good to do aspect, but also from a climate change risk perspective as well. And, what are the climate change and sustainability kind of risks on my business? So investors are really looking to make sure organizations have a really good handle on this. The second part of your question around how that then evolves into to kind of releasing capital and resources, etc., etc. A well thought out sustainability strategy and governance model will see sustainability embedded into the organization, right from the senior team down through operations, HR, etc., etc. So that's kind of key to kind of have within your business to kind of really leverage the kind of the resources and make it almost business as usual. I think the other aspect is looking at commercially what you can do. The supply chain is also looking at how can they evolve, how can they win your business, how can they kind of deliver more. So to your point, energy performance contracts, third-party funding, there's a lot of green finance out there. So there are ways of being able to kind of leverage that to kind of access the funding. I think for me, the key within that does become timescales. Whether it's funding large new air conditioning refits, or actually investing in solar panels to put on top of data centers or wherever. These are still long-term commitments, and that is something that actually I think some companies still battle with, just because of the kind of the short-term nature. And I think that's still the final piece of the jigsaw that needs to evolve in kind of corporate sustainability strategies, being able to take a longer-term view. Because the longer term you can take with your supply chains as well, then they're more inclined to invest and kind of deliver some additional value. So those are kind of some of the key points that I think if you can cover off and you can build that into your sustainability strategy, then actually you're on a good footing to kind of deliver some good results.
Very good. Vijay, complementing that, and we know O2 is a quite innovative operator, always thinking ahead, and sustainability has been on the board for you for some time. But what about securing funding to deliver the projects that you find important, that you and your team find relevant? How does it work for you in O2 UK?
So I think from what Paul, kind of building on what Paul said there, I agree with all the things he just said there. From an O2 perspective, we've had to look at this differently from a typical payback business case, Gabriel, where we want to install something that has a typical payback of a number of years and is kind of bound with those restrictions. From a carbon point of view, we need to realise that actually some of these benefits are going to pay back over a longer period of time. And we've got to do this because it's the right thing to do. So you can't look at it simply from a business case point of view. There's plenty of money out there if you know where to look for it. There's green loans. The greener you are, the better loans you can secure. So it's sort of self-fulfilling, Gabrielle. So the better you are, the better rates you can secure. So I think it's about making sure that your strategy is aligned to those funding models as well. So knowing what's out there is quite important. You could fall at the first hurdle because you think that you just can't afford it, or the business appetite for that project just isn't there when actually it is. In terms of your question around evolution, Gabrielle, I've certainly seen evolution of our roles from sort of operational, where we're looking for savings. Saving the company money, so going from those sorts of roles where we're looking at purely from the angle of, well, if we use less energy, we're going to be spending less money. So how can we save energy and save OPEX costs? Back in the Kodak days, it was all around generating our own power, and it was all around, well, how do we make ourselves as efficient as we can be and use less gas, which means we're going to save some money. But back then it was around balancing the needs of the factory against those savings. we used to sell energy back to the grid also, again, to make those financial savings. But I think in terms of evolution, I think energy managers are now becoming more strategic. I see more and more energy and environmental managers getting more and more involved in that sort of strategic decision-making process, but also managing the day-to-day, bureau services, smart metering, bill validation, that sort of thing. But I think it's really important to understand that back then there wasn't the flexibility that there is now, and we do have more options in terms of buying kit. PPAs, for example, historically there was nervousness around signing up to PPAs because the perception was they're not very flexible, and why do we want to tie ourselves into a 10-15 year type deal, whereas now we know that they are more flexible, and they are I guess to fulfill that balance of generation, they do fit the bill. So what I'm trying to say here is that, if you look at the generation mix in the UK now in terms of how that's evolving, Gabrielle, you've got fossil fuels form the large mix. Going forward, as we move to renewables, that renewables mix is going to have to be there. It's not just going to be one thing. It's not just going to be wind. It's not just going to be solar. It's going to be batteries as well. But also the network has to evolve to manage that as well. What do you do on a day when it's not windy and it's not sunny? Well, you rely on your batteries, right? Or what do you do on a day when it's the opposite? How do you get the power from the batteries to where it needs to be? So I think that the network needs to evolve along with the generation as well.
Thank you so much. And I'll go back to you now, Vijay, and then we'll get some additional comments from Paul on your new slogan. So take carbon out of O2. That's a really interesting slogan and great for our discussion today. But I would like to understand from you what it means exactly.
Okay, Gabriel, no problem. So our commitment, Gabriel, is to become net zero by 2025, and there are essentially three strands to this, Gabriel. The first part is to procure renewable energy. That's very important for us. Most of our emissions comes from electricity, so it's important that we source it from the right place. Historically, we've been able to control the supply where it's within our operational control, but now we're looking a bit further afield and looking at sources that are outside of our operational control as well. The second part of it is around efficiency. It's no good having an ambitious net zero carbon plan and not worrying about the efficiency side of things. As our sector grows and our businesses grow, the demand for data grows, and ultimately it means we need to install more kit on our sites. That kit tends to be more dense in terms of the amount of energy that it draws. So ultimately the demand for energy increases. So you've got to make sure you're keeping a lid on the energy efficiency side of things. But also further afield, Gabriel, looking at our supply chain. The Carbon Trust have carried out a number of surveys now across the tech industry, and we know now that our own emissions is only a very, very small part of the overall supply chain. Our supply chain could be 10 times as big as we are in terms of carbon. So we've got to do something about that as well as part of our commitments. We can't just look at what we're able to control ourselves. So we do have commitments around shifting more of our emissions to renewable sources along our supply chain, Gabriel, by 2025. But ultimately, with in answer to your question around 5G, it means more equipment, it means more data, it means more traffic, and ultimately that means using more energy. But the equipment is getting more efficient. Compared to 2015, say, it now takes 80% less energy now to push a unit of data through our network, and that's through a combination of things. It's through buying the right equipment from the right vendors. It's about operating it efficiently as well. And so it's a combination of lots and lots of things. But I would say that some of the challenges that we're facing around this, Gabriel, are around sort of space, power, and cooling. Our sites are static and they only have so much space, and we're installing more and more equipment on those sites than ever before. So the challenge really is, how do we maintain that efficiency with the infrastructure that we have?
To you, Paul, how would you complement, and please elaborate a bit on these new technologies and what do they mean for us as digital infrastructure people?
Yeah, I think VJ makes I suppose a fundamental point in terms of how our connectivity infrastructure has to evolve going forwards. I think obviously COVID, everyone working from home, we've all kind of seen the kind of the peak of demand that's been driven by great data flows, everyone on doing webinars and on Zoom calls, etc. But it also, as well as that, there's the evolution of how we move around, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. All of this requires connectivity to be able to kind of work safely and efficiently. And I think when you look at how the geography of countries, 5G and new technology always kind of naturally tends to be town and city centric first, and then it kind of builds out into kind of rural. Where I used to work, we used to kind of call it islands and bridges. People still travel between the islands of the cities and the towns. And so if you've got electric vehicles, if you've got autonomous vehicles, they are still going to need to be able to operate as you kind of travel between and across the bridges. So, we are still going to have to continue to roll out infrastructure in cities, but also ensure that the kind of the veins of countries that connect everything together are also well served as well. So we will see sort of more fibre rollout, maybe 5G complementing or replacing. It's going to, the technology providers and kind of telco are going to have to kind of work out how we're going to get greater connectivity right across the country. And being able to provide the kind of the bandwidth with it as well. So 5G is obviously one of the key technologies that's going to help do that. So I think this is an evolving kind of picture as we kind of go. As I said, the technology itself will continue to get more efficient, but actually it's becoming a bit more of a minefield for town planners, councils. Into how are they going to manage this? Who are they going to allow to install the infrastructure? How are they going to manage it? How are they going to use it themselves? How do their communities use it from a kind of a smart city perspective as well? So it comes down to huge amounts more of connectivity, huge amounts more of data. And actually, how do you best manage that? And what are you kind of doing with that? The permissions and the access, or anything to do with kind of privacy policies and things like that. There's a lot of different facets to this that different groups of stakeholders need to kind of get their heads around. And for me, that's the biggest challenge for these kind of groups is kind of what is the strategy moving forwards. And whilst you may have a strategy independent in your own kind of sphere of influence, how does that also then connect with others? You've got visiting people coming into your area. How do they engage with electric vehicle charging or access to park, whatever it may be? All of these things need to ultimately be kind of joined up, and that's where kind of industry comes in terms of creating standards, interoperability, and things like that. Those things still have to be at the core of what we do to ensure that the ultimate end user experience is as good as it can be.
Thank you. And to you all connected, also thank you for your participation and feedback. So please stay with us, send your comments, send questions. We published a small poll days ago, basically looking at this first aspect of energy efficiency and technology. So how to reduce power consumption, basically, as Vijay was saying, that's how the story starts. And we just separated 4 groups: high efficiency power, thermal management or cooling, metering, monitoring and controls, and finally smart grid and energy prosuming. And we got great feedback from you. Thank you all. all the options received votes, which is a good sign. All of them are relevant, and that was kind of intentional. Some people said, oh, you should have a all of above option, but that would be too easy. Particularly, we see that in the short term, cooling technologies, thermal management can be quite important in terms of savings. We see innovations even coming to teamwork and artificial intelligence, algorithms, machine learning to make cooling more efficient in data centers, and that's coming to other sites as well. And then we have all these great innovations that will be powered by 5G. IoT is already with us machine to machine for some years, but now we can have massive IoT with 5G and have much more control of everything. A lot of the energy delivery now becomes a computing problem. So, and that will lead us to the next chapter of our conversation, that is about renewables. So how do you see, starting with Paul, the sourcing and usage of renewables, also the economic aspects, and bringing it, after Vijay will be invited to bring it to the reality of a telecom operator. Yeah, but please your comments on PPAs, on certificates of origin, on the usage of solar and wind and other technologies, both on site and in large developments where the operator maybe is a participant, a supporter in that model, rather than the generator itself.
Sure. So I think what any of this kind of starts off with is kind of a strategy, and ultimately these days organizations, we want to be heading for kind of net zero, and then potentially even above. So we've talked a lot about the first stage, which is optimizing existing assets and then kind of replacing them and investing in more efficient ones. And there comes a point where you just can't become efficient until you're zero. So the sourcing of renewables is a key part. You've alluded to the fact that there's kind of off-the-shelf renewables, and that's kind of one way of kind of getting some sort of first stage renewable power into your portfolio. But actually, what's really I suppose ticking all the boxes is the ability to engage with a developer to build or procure renewable energy from a new kind of asset. That could be a solar farm, a wind farm, remotely, or even on your own land. So, we've touched on PPAs, power purchase agreements, and that's really the umbrella term that kind of can cover all of these. Now, if you are, you have a data center or large buildings with quite a bit of roof space, then yes, you can look at putting solar PV on that. Again, commercially, you can either invest in it yourselves or actually engage with a developer through a power purchase agreement. So they can provide the capital, they can install it, and even kind of operate it, and you are literally just buying the power from them. That has some great benefits if you're doing it on site, because it kind of reduces any transmission fees and losses you would get if that kind of asset was more remote. But by and large, even if you've got quite a bit of land and roof space, if you're talking data centers and IT infrastructure, it clearly is never going to be able to power all of it. So this is where larger scale wind farms and developments kind of come in. The concept of additionality and engaging with a developer for a large wind farm really kind of shows a commitment to sort of greening your kind of incoming energy supply. And as I say, power purchase agreements are the kind of the way forward. And actually, the way you can contract with these now, you can sleeve, certainly in the UK, you can sleeve them into your existing energy supply agreements, and because we are have evolved so much in terms of the technology behind wind and solar, the price is actually coming down to the point where it's certainly on wind technology, there are developers that are building it without government subsidies. So actually, it's part of a kind of a risk management strategy. It can actually be quite competitive compared to, I suppose, traditional brown power now. So you almost get to a point of going, well, why wouldn't you do this? Again, it does come back to some of the requirements in long-term contracting. You know, if it's a new build asset, you are looking at 10, 15 years. And so, you know, you do have to have a view on that. And again, you can choose. You know, you don't have to necessarily do 100% of your demand. There are a number of ways of managing that risk. You could just go for 25 or 50. It doesn't tick all the boxes or necessarily offset all of your kind of carbon footprint, but it is a way of managing risk. You know, personally, I would always push for going for 100%, and then within your PPA contracts, look at how you can manage that. Because clearly, if your portfolio did shrink by 50% over a period, then there's a ways and means of selling that power back into the grid. And there are ways and means of kind of protecting that position as well. So it's not a sort of an and or. There are some real kind of flexible approaches that you can take to kind of integrate a kind of really robust kind of renewable strategy into your kind of portfolio. But as I said, just to kind of bring this piece kind of back full circle, you kind of need to have it as part of a holistic carbon strategy. You know, cliche, you know, I would kind of use the buy, reduce, comply. You know, and the buying bit is one part of it. We've been talking mainly around sort of reductions and kind of operations, and then you've got the comply bit at the other end. But you know, fundamentally, renewables and PPAs are kind of best practice for the buy part of that equation.
Very good. So Vijay, what's O2's approach to renewables?
So Gabriel, in terms of our O2's approach linked to our group commitments, Gabriel, we have group commitments to purchase renewables. I think it depends which part of the world you're in as well, Gabriel. So where we are in the UK, we're fortunate we've got a reliable grid compared to other parts of the world. We have access to renewable energy, which is relatively cheap, and as Paul said, the prices aren't too dissimilar to buying brown energy, for example. So it's a bit of a no-brainer, buying renewable energy as an absolute minimum. I think in terms of PPAs, you've got the benefit there of that additionality. You're then investing in UK PLC, you're investing in more infrastructure, and that's the direction of travel at the moment. So historically, you've seen energy suppliers funding and getting grants for new installs for generation. You know, you see the size of the sort of offshore wind farms now off the coast of Scotland in the hundreds of megawatts sort of size, and these are really being backed by energy suppliers. But I think we're seeing a shift more towards UK businesses investing in renewables through things like PPAs. But I think it's got to be a balance, and it's got to be a mix, and it's got to be almost dispelling some of those myths around being locked into a PPA. You know, we've seen energy prices really bounce around over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and PPAs offer that sort of stable price whilst investing in UK PLC as well. So I think the companies that are going to get this right are going to adopt the right sort of mix. I don't think there's one solution that fits all. You know, what I won't condone is sort of just go out there and buy renewables. You know, you're seeing lots and lots of companies being more open and public around their sustainability commitments, and a lot of those do include buying renewable energy as a fundamental. But just going back to what I was saying earlier about the mix, there needs to be a mix in the marketplace, just as there is now. It won't work if we just invest in one type of technology or another. But whatever we do, it needs to be scalable as well. Having that additionality is an obvious plus. So it's part of our overall strategy, Gabrielle, in terms of what we're doing at O2. It's part of the net zero plan. It's not just, as I said before, it's not just about reducing our emissions. It's about becoming more efficient and making sure we source those renewables from the right places as well. In terms of local on-site renewables, yeah, I mean, we operate a mixed bag of sites. You know, we have retail stores, cell sites, some of which only occupy a very, very small area, but we do have larger data centres as well. But you've really got to balance the argument, especially on the smaller sites, the argument of small scale renewables and how efficient they are compared to investing in a larger, say, wind farm, for example. You know, is it better for the environment to install lots and lots of small turbines on lots of sites, or is it more efficient to invest in a wind farm where you can benefit from the economies of scale, for example? If you do it that way around, the farm might be, you know, away from your site, so then you've got, you know, transmission losses. What do you do with those? Do you buy offsets for those? Do you ignore them? Do you take those into account? So I think it needs to be a balanced approach overall, Gabrielle. I think that's the key here, not just homing in on one solution or another.
To our great audience, thank you so much for participating, for all the interaction. We're collecting some very interesting feedback. There will be a feedback survey. We have the poll. We have all your comments and questions. There is one interesting question here from Amanda in the US. So she's asking about smart energy, which means smart grids. You mentioned, Vijay, selling energy back to the grid, supporting the power grid with frequency response, with demand response, with all those innovations. Of course, that varies country by country, but this is a big trend. As we add more renewables to the grid, it can get unstable. It can need more controls and more support from the consumers. And now we are calling the consumers prosumers, energy prosuming, which means producing and consuming energy at the same time. So please, starting with Paul and then Vijay, could you explain to us a bit the concepts, and this is what Amanda is bringing, those innovative concepts around smart energy, smart grids, and how that can be applied to a telecom operator? That will be for Vijay to complement. So Paul, please, would you clarify this to us?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a number of the points here. I think from a renewables perspective, it can be erratic. Clearly, you know, turbines, electricity only generates when the wind blows. But the overall kind of demand, whether you look at an individual or a telecoms company or a country as a whole, is reasonably kind of static. There are some kind of peaks at certain times of the day, but you know, the ability for a local grid to match that has always been fundamental to the concept of resilience. So if you've got a lot of renewables, then the generation can be quite erratic. We've seen battery storage come to the market and grid scale battery storage come to the market, and that's replacing some of the traditional and kind of dirty, shall we call it, plants that used to be used for helping to kind of balance the grid. And what we're seeing is actually, certainly in the UK, our national grid, who kind of manages all of our electricity infrastructure at a kind of a high level, they're introducing new business models, new incentives for end users to be able to kind of participate and help balance the grid. You mentioned things like frequency response, demand reduction. This used to be, you know, trying to persuade your head of property or your head of FM to kind of use your diesel generators at certain times of the day, and there was always a bit of a reluctance to to do that, because they were there for pure resilience purposes. But actually now there are companies, again coming back to the kind of the IoT, the connectivity piece, that will look at not only your diesel generators but also your air conditioning units, your lighting systems, and use those and kind of pull them collectively into what's basically called a virtual power plant. And so you will sign up a selection of your assets. They will have a, depending on the size, kilowatt, megawatt demand associated with them, and you can choose to kind of make available your assets to either turn down, turn up, or respond at certain times of day, whatever the kind of requirement is. And that can then give you a new additional kind of revenue stream. And one of the examples that certainly from a telecoms perspective, or even kind of large corporates, anyone that has traditional kind of backup generators, when they're coming to the end of life, rather than replacing like for like, you're seeing organizations look at batteries instead, because rather than just sit there waiting for an outage, that battery can actually be participating in the kind of the local market, earning revenue, but always being, I suppose, prioritized for an outage. So you can always kind of leave minimum charge in it, and you can only use it maybe on certain times of the day. There's quite a lot of flexibility in what you can do with it. So effectively, I mean, you're enabling your assets to kind of work for you, and that's kind of the kind of the concept of the kind of the smart grid, of kind of just decentralizing generation.
As a telco, Gabriel, our job really is to make sure that those devices are connected. That's our job. It needs to manage those connections. I think with 5G, we've already talked about low latency. So I think telcos have a really important part to play in terms of those connected devices. I think areas like manufacturers will be a kind of prime area to benefit, especially with a low latency, with machine to machine connectivity, kind of benefiting from that latency, and that puts more of a reliance on our network. So as a telco, we need to make sure that our network is as resilient as ever. If you look at the amount, it's just the sheer volume of data we process as a company on a day-to-day and a year-to-year, we're having to process double digits in terms of growth year on year, and it's making sure that we're building for the future, Gabriel, and making sure that we're almost proactively predicting that demand and building that in now. But that in itself provides a challenge. Do you go ahead and install lots and lots of equipment now, thinking you might need it next year? The landscape could be very, very different next year. You could have more sites, more micro sites using small amounts of data, and you could have a different type of grid. So it's trying to balance the needs of now whilst trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. And that's no easy thing, because whilst all of that is going on, we still need to maintain connectivity. We still need to make sure our customers are connected whilst all of that is happening. But we are seeing more and more collaboration in the industry, and I think that's important. And it's a way of making sure that as an industry we're doing the right thing. But with a relatively small number, Gabriel, of vendors in the marketplace, especially from a radio perspective, we've just got to make sure that we keep the pressure on, or we make sure that the vendors are doing the right thing, because ultimately we're buying equipment, aren't we, and making it work as a network. We don't manufacture radio equipment, we don't manufacture cooling equipment, we buy it in. So it's really important that we keep the pressure on our supply chain to make sure that we're getting the most efficient kit as possible.
Very good, very good. I was talking to an industry expert this morning, and he was saying exactly that, Vijay, that you pointed out. We had the era of the communication for telecom operators. Then we evolved into the era of information, and now we have also coordination, because all of those smart grids and smart cities and mobility have to be coordinated by devices, hardware and software, and obviously connectivity, but not only, value-added services as well. Again, unfortunately, I mean, great participation from our panelists and also from the audience, but we're running out of time, unfortunately. So please, just your final remarks, your final messages.
Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to having that robust strategy. I think historically, we almost kind of started the beginning of this conversation in a bit of a siloed mentality of going, right, what's the equipment that we need? And I think for me, that's kind of one facet of it. And actually, a successful organization in managing its long-term carbon footprint and hitting a net zero target is to actually understand what is your procurement strategy, not just from a renewables perspective, but also from an equipment specification perspective. What is it from a facilities support perspective, the other supply chain, how can they all work together to deliver on and support your kind of objectives? What is your list of projects that you're going to do over the next few years? What do you need funding for? How can you fund it? And then ultimately, these should almost, produce one of the kind of traditional waterfall charts of going, right, I can see now the individual steps that are going to take me to kind of net zero. And it won't be over 12 months. It won't be over 24 months. It'll be over the next, 3, 5, 10 years time. But to be successful and to keep focus, having that strategy and kind of having it understood right from the board through to the kind of the rest of the business is kind of key. Otherwise, and so I would encourage sustainability professionals, energy professionals to engage with the wider business on actually understanding that, defining it, and kind of cementing it into the wider business objectives.
Thank you so much, Paul. Vijay, your final remarks, please.
So, Gabriel, from my side, I think be bold. Be bold. The technology usually exists. If you've got an issue, there's usually something out there that can solve the problem. And the money is out there as well. Clearly, there's lots of ways to fund what you're trying to do. You've got to have a robust but a flexible strategy. You'll have a strategy now, but it will change in 6 months. It will change 12 months down the line. So be prepared for those changes and kind of embrace those changes. But get involved in the forums, the Energy Managers Association. There's lots of other forums out there to get involved in. So talk to people, but I think have that hierarchy in your mind of, well, look, gold standard. What can we do? How far can we push this? That's where you should be aiming. First of all, and make lots of noise. Engage, communicate, get stuck in, talk to your peers. Make lots of noise internally. The more noise you make, the more traction you'll get, I think, in these things.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. To all of you, thank you so much. We'll continue the conversation via LinkedIn. The topics we couldn't cover online will be reviewed offline. We'll have a deeper conversation if that's applicable, if that's what you would like. So stay with us. Respond, please, to the feedback survey. Keep sending your ideas. As I said, the conversation keeps going. Special thanks to Telefónica Group for all the energy efficiency effort over the years. That's actually the reason why the three of us had our paths crossed, which is great. So special thanks to Telefónica Group, brilliantly represented by Vijay today. Thank you so much, Paul, Vijay, great to have you. Thanks for accepting the invitation from Vertiv. Thanks to you all who are still with us and who participated. Keep safe. See you next time. Thank you so much. Bye now.